murder of King Von, the affidavit further disclosed that confidential witness one knew that Lil Durk placed other.
You know what I'm saying? Because it had to be that. Ain't no way. Motherfucker followed them on somebody. Motherfucker, they put an air tag. If a nigga got an air tag, well, they gonna catch you at the light. They ain't gonna wait till you motherfucker pull up to no motherfucking store. And man, they wanted him, man. Somebody wanted him bad, man. That was.
What if the streets finally handed over a verdict? In a chilling turn of events, Lil Durk has been sentenced for orchestrating the brutal deaths of King Von and THF Bayzoo, an outcome that reverberates far beyond the courtroom. This isn't just a legal blow, it's the culmination of a cycle of violence that has plagued Chicago's neighborhoods and its rising voices. The city still feels the sting of those last track, where Durk's words once tried to stitch hope into a fractured community. Behind the headlines lies a quieter but no less powerful story: the weight of fame, the relentless threat of the streets, and a mind fraying under the pressure of a system that keeps repeating itself. As we unpack the details of the sentence and what it means for the soul of Chicago's rap scene, one question hangs heavy. What will this verdict do to the narrative of survival and redemption that Durk once promised? Stay tuned for the full breakdown. In the heart of Chicago, the city hums with the rhythm of horns and heartbeats, the same pulse that carries both dreams and danger. It is a place where talent rises from concrete and music tells the stories that the streets dare not speak aloud. Amid that living canvas, a sudden, brutal loss struck like a sudden storm, leaving an echo that reverberated through every corner of the neighborhood. The name that vanished that day was THF Bayzoo, a voice that had woven the threads of struggle and hope into a single song, a melody that had made the city feel a little more united, a little less fractured. The day the news broke, social media exploded with grief, anger, and a rush of speculation that had the city turning its attention from the usual grind to the sudden tragedy. The silence that followed in the living rooms and on the streets was a stark reminder of how fragile life is, especially when the streets are a revolving door of violence. For many, the loss felt personal, as though a friend had been taken in a blink, a brother's call that had suddenly stopped. Yet even as the city mourned, another story unfolded beneath the surface, quieter but equally powerful. Conversations that began as casual whispers among friends and collaborators turned into a candid revelation of a different kind of struggle, the mental strain that had been quietly tightening its grip on one of Chicago's most prominent artists, Lil Durk. He had long been known for narrating his experiences in verses that were both intimate and universal. But behind those lyrical narratives, there were moments of fear and fatigue that he rarely let slip outside the studio. The pressure of a career that demanded constant reinvention, the weight of a reputation built on storytelling, and the ever-present threat of gunfire on the streets were a heavy burden. He once said, in a tone that carried the weight of a veteran, that violence is a revolving door that never closes. In that metaphor, each new door is a threat, each exit a new fear. A friend, close enough to hear his inner thoughts, described the scene as a carousel that spins relentlessly, each turn pulling him deeper into a cycle that seemed impossible to escape. When he speaks about the streets, he talks about a place where no one is spared, where the doors of a doorless prison keep opening and closing. That was the narrative that lived in his mind, an echo that resonated every time a new threat surfaced, every time a new beat dropped. The community could not help but feel that the city had been weakened by that loss. The streets, once vibrant with the voices that sought to bring people together, felt a little dimmer. The city's pulse had slowed, not because a single voice had been silenced, but because the rhythm of gunshots matched the heartbeat of the streets in a way that made the city feel more fragile than it had ever been. The speculation that lingered in the air was heavy with a dangerous possibility. Rumors swirled that the shooting of THF Bayzoo might have stemmed from an internal conflict, perhaps a betrayal or a feud that had escalated within a crew or set. The idea that an inside job could have taken place added a cinematic quality to the tragedy, a face-to-face confrontation that turned into a violent act. When the internet flooded with clips of heated exchanges and cryptic messages, the narrative seemed almost inevitable. The city, once again, found itself caught between the personal and the public, between the music that had once unified and the violence that had fractured. It was at this moment that the name Lil Durk resurfaced, not as a lyrical storyteller, but as a figure surrounded by speculation. In a city where alliances shift like the wind, the rumor that he might have been involved in a violent act that had killed a fellow artist sent ripples that hit even the most cautious listeners. There was no concrete evidence, but the chatter that kept circling his name was enough to shake the community. The conversation turned into a collective question of loyalty and respect, two concepts that Durk had always spoken about in his work. While the speculation hung in the air, the focus also shifted to the mental health crisis that plagued the city's younger artists and their fans. Durk's earlier statements were no longer isolated remarks. They became a testament to the relentless fear that permeated daily life in neighborhoods saturated with conflict. The trauma of being shot at any moment created a psychological burden that he openly shared, a vulnerability that made his fans see him as a mirror of their own struggles.
No more. It's just normal to the people who live in it. I'm not here to judge nobody.
Durk's remark about getting your kids for life was more than a phrase. It was an expression of protective instinct. He was calling for shielding the younger generation from the relentless churn of violence. In a city where the streets do not forgive, the idea of safeguarding the next generation became a lifeline that was woven into the music he created. The rumor that Lil Durk might have been involved in the shooting added a layer of complexity that challenged the public persona of an artist revered for addressing loss and hardship in his music. If the rumor were true, it would present a conflict between Durk's cultivated image as an honest storyteller and his alleged actions. If false, it would underline the necessity of careful investigation and the dangers of swift judgment. The community for now could only watch as speculation continued to unfold, knowing that each rumor had the potential to derail a healing process, to divert attention from the systemic issues that have been quietly building beneath the surface. Police involvement was cautious. Officers navigated a city rife with misinformation, carefully weighing the possibility that the shooting could stem from a personal vendetta rather than a broader conspiracy. They considered internal conflicts that might have led to retaliation. The lack of evidence complicated the matter. The investigative process took time, and the community's patience was tested. Meanwhile, the city remained united in grief, but also in resolve. During the slow march toward clarity, the community found solace in shared narratives. T600's live stream became a focal point. As the news hit, his voice captured the somber atmosphere, revealing how a group of people, fans, collaborators, friends, could find solace in a shared story. The room's silence was heavy, yet it was also a space where the city's unity was felt in the quiet. In the aftermath of the shooting, the city had to confront the cycles that underpinned its violence. The tragedy of THF Bayzoo's shooting propelled an urgent examination of the systems that had contributed to the city's mental health crisis, societal pressures, the role of media, and the influence of celebrity figures. It became a multi-layered reflection, a narrative that was not simply a recounting of an incident, but a broader canvas that explored how a city in mourning was pushed to confront the underlying issues that had been quietly building for years. The investigation continued, the city's patience tested, and the community's resolve forged in the quiet moments that followed. The loss of THF Bayzoo and the speculation surrounding Lil Durk's possible involvement were not the end of the story. They were a chapter in a larger narrative that called for deeper understanding of a city where music and violence exist side by side. In that narrative, the music that had once unified the city had to continue calling for hope, for healing, for a future that could move beyond the revolving doors of violence and find peace in a different rhythm. The city's heartbeat, once a frantic drum of sirens and footsteps, slowed as a collective breath filled the square where the town hall gathered. Voices rose in a chorus of questions that had long been waiting to be voiced. Who was truly responsible for THF Bayzoo's death? And how could the community prevent another soul from being torn from its streets? The room, packed with neighbors, activists, parents, and artists, held an air of determination that had been forged in the grief that followed the shooting. The first speaker, a local council member, stepped forward and spoke of a holistic approach, a phrase that resonated as both promise and challenge. He acknowledged that anger was a catalyst for change, but that the city's future depended on tangible solutions, not merely on the closure of an investigation. The conversation unfurled into a tapestry of interlocking initiatives. One thread was the expansion of youth outreach programs. Schools, in partnership with community centers and local businesses, began weaving mentorship into their curricula. Coaches, teachers, and former artists met with students to discuss careers in music, business, and community leadership. The aim was to provide a constructive outlet for frustration, a space where the voices of the young could be heard without fear of being silenced by violence. These programs were designed not only to keep youth away from potential criminal activity, but also to nurture a sense of belonging and purpose that had often been missing in the neighborhoods hardest hit by crime. Another strand was the reinforcement of mental health resources.
The health department rolled out a public awareness campaign that paired free counseling services with a 24/7 hotline staffed by volunteers who had survived the city's own cycle of violence. Their own stories, shared in hushed, earnest conversation, offered a lifeline for those in crisis, bridging the gap between professional help and the community's trust. The hotlines became a place where a young man in distress could talk through his anger without fear of judgment or reprisal, a chance to find a path toward peace before a moment of heat turned into a permanent tragedy. The city's policing model, too, was reborn. Precincts adopted a community-first philosophy, where officers were no longer perceived as distant figures, but as participants in the local culture.
Involved in this murder for hire. One of the things that caught my eye in their response opposing Lil Durk's motion to dismiss,
regular attendance at neighborhood events and volunteer patrols turned officers into familiar faces, a presence that fostered dialogue rather than isolation. The precincts also introduced a dedicated portal for updates on investigations, making progress visible and rumors invisible. The portal's transparency ensured that the community could hold the justice system accountable, knowing that every piece of evidence and every turn of inquiry would be publicly documented. As the city built new shelters for the young, the artistic community mobilized for healing. A memorial concert orchestrated by a coalition of local musicians and residents gathered people across the city's neighborhoods into one shared experience of grief and hope. The evening's program included spoken word performances that reflected on the loss of THF Bayzoo and the broader implications of unchecked violence. In one of the most moving moments, a local poet spoke of a world where no life should be cut short, and a chorus of claps followed as the crowd answered, "We can change." Following the concert, a collaborative mural project spread across the city's walls, with symbols of unity and resilience painted by artists from every corner of the city. Each brushstroke became a testament that the community would not allow the tragedy to paint itself over the hope of tomorrow. Amid the new initiatives, a darker strand persisted, the rumor about Lil Durk's orchestrated involvement. Media outlets had flooded the square with sensational headlines, their words amplified by the internet's relentless churn. Yet the community did not allow speculation to drown out progress. A forum dedicated to rumor management quickly emerged, a space where fact-checkers and community leaders convened to sift through the allegations. Members gathered around tables of documents, photographs, and testimonies, dissecting every claim with the patience of scholars. This forum, rooted in the same ethos that guided the task force, cultivated a more informed public dialogue, steering conversations away from conjecture and toward constructive discussions about prevention strategies. The task force itself, a multidisciplinary team, embodied the city's commitment to structural change. City officials, mental health professionals, educators, law enforcement officers, and artists coalesced to design a multi-year plan aimed at tackling poverty, inadequate educational resources, and the erosion of trust between residents and police. The plan contained specific metrics, a reduction in recidivism rates, increased counseling center visits, and higher school engagement. It also outlined measurable goals, such as a target to cut violent incidents in neighborhoods by a quarter within 5 years. Every member brought a different perspective, yet they were bound together by a shared objective: to eradicate the root causes that made the city vulnerable to such tragedies. The personal stories that surfaced during these conversations revealed the human cost of the crisis and the progress the city was striving toward. A mother whose son's life had been cut short spoke at the council meeting, her voice trembling with raw emotion. She urged the city to honor her son's memory by investing in programs that would provide safe spaces for youth. She painted a vivid picture of her son's dreams: a love for music, a desire to share his voice, and a yearning to rise above the hardships of his environment. Her plea echoed in the room, a clarion call for tangible action. A young man, once on the brink of becoming a victim of the city's violence, shared how the new mental health services and community mentoring had redirected his path toward constructive expression. He spoke of the days he spent in the counseling center, learning to channel his anger into rhythm and lyric. The mentorship program had opened a door for him to collaborate with local artists and producers, giving him real-world experience that replaced the lure of quick, dangerous gains. His story was not a single narrative, but a beacon of possibility, illuminating how the city's investments could transform a single life into a ripple of change. An activist, long known for his work in neighborhood watch programs, recounted how the new community policing unit had restored his faith in the system. He remembered a time when officers had seemed like strangers, their presence a source of intimidation rather than protection. The community policing unit, now integrated into local events and patrols, had become a familiar face at neighborhood gatherings. This shift in perception was palpable. The activist spoke of a newfound sense of agency, of being able to voice concerns without fear that the law would be an adversary rather than an ally. The city's narrative continued to expand beyond the immediate aftermath. It evolved into a broader dialogue about the necessity of sustained commitment. Policy proposals, community action, artistic expression, and personal testimonies were woven together, each reinforcing the others. The new counseling centers that opened in previously underserved neighborhoods became sanctuaries where the city's past could be acknowledged and its future could be rebuilt. Precincts that had once been viewed with suspicion now became places of community partnership, officers attending local events, and residents collaborating with the law enforcement that had once seemed distant. The council passed an ordinance that allocated significant funds for youth mentorship programs, partnering schools with local businesses and artists. The ordinance also established a framework for real-world experience, ensuring that students could see beyond textbook learning and into the realms of entrepreneurship and creative expression. Businesses welcomed this partnership, seeing it as an opportunity to cultivate the next generation of innovators and leaders, while artists found a platform to share their craft in a supportive environment that valued the next generation's aspirations. The Public Health Department's campaign for mental health awareness took a new form, featuring testimonials from residents who had benefited from counseling services. A father who had once felt powerless after the loss of his son found in the counseling center a community that listened without judgment.
If you listen to Lil Durk's music, if you listen to Lil Durk's emissions, man, listen.
He spoke in a candid manner, his story a powerful reminder that the city's collective trauma could be mitigated through open, honest communication. The campaign's message was simple yet profound. Healing begins when we allow ourselves to be heard. The hotline, a vital component of the city's mental health infrastructure, expanded its staffing roster to include trained volunteers who could provide immediate support during crises. The volunteers were selected not only for their training, but also for their lived experience. They embodied the city's resilience and offered a relatable source of comfort to those in distress. The hotline's success was measured by the number of calls answered, the number of referrals made to counseling centers, and the decrease in the number of violent incidents tied to unresolved mental health issues. Rumor management became a staple of the city's communication strategy. A dedicated forum, staffed by fact-checkers and community leaders, was launched to scrutinize claims and encourage citizens to verify sources before sharing. The forum's approach was transparent. Each rumor was examined, evidence presented, and conclusions drawn. This systematic method ensured that sensational headlines no longer had the power to dictate public perception. Instead, the forum served as a conduit for truth, directing conversations toward prevention strategies rather than speculation. The task force, comprised of city officials, mental health professionals, educators, law enforcement, and artists, convened regularly to review progress against its metrics. Each meeting brought new data: a decline in recidivism rates, an uptick in counseling center visits, and improved school engagement scores. These metrics were more than numbers. They were the city's pulse, indicating that the initiatives were working. The task force's ability to adapt plans based on data reinforced the city's commitment to iterative improvement, ensuring that strategies remained relevant as the community's needs evolved. In the months that followed, new counseling centers opened in neighborhoods that had previously been underserved. Each center carried a warm, inviting facade, a contrast to the gritty brick walls that had once stood as silent witnesses to violence. Inside, residents could sit with therapists, talk through their traumas, and find guidance. The centers became community hubs where youth could gather after school to participate in creative workshops, and families could attend support groups, strengthening intergenerational bonds that had been weakened by fear. Police precincts adopted a community-first approach, with officers regularly attending local events and participating in neighborhood patrols. This approach was not a replacement for law enforcement's traditional duties, but a complement, ensuring that officers were seen as partners rather than adversaries. The officers' presence at a local block party, for example, fostered a sense of safety among residents who had once felt the sting of police distrust. The officers' interactions with local artists and musicians during community patrols symbolized a shared commitment to the city's cultural life, a recognition that art and safety were intertwined. The city's ordinance, which allocated funds for youth mentorship programs, partnered schools with local businesses and artists to provide real-world experience and guidance. The mentorship programs were structured around real projects. A student might collaborate with a local baker to learn about supply chains, or a budding rapper might work with an established producer to understand the mechanics of recording and promotion. These experiences provided tangible skills that equipped the youth to navigate both the music industry and everyday life, thereby narrowing the gap between aspiration and opportunity. The Public Health Department rolled out a campaign promoting mental health awareness, featuring testimonials from residents who had benefited from counseling services. One testimonial recounted a night of crisis where a friend, feeling overwhelmed, dialed the new hotline and found a compassionate ear. The counselor's calm guidance helped the friend find the strength to stay the course, a story that echoed across the community and encouraged others to seek help. Another testimonial highlighted how regular visits to the counseling center had helped a teenager recover from trauma, providing a blueprint for coping with grief that had otherwise seemed insurmountable. The new hotline, staffed by trained volunteers, became a staple in the city's emergency response. When a call came in, the volunteers answered with empathy, providing immediate emotional support while connecting the caller to specialized resources. The hotline's success was reflected in its growing call volume and the decrease in the number of violent incidents that involved unresolved mental health issues. Each call was a testament that the city's commitment to transparency, collaboration, and data-driven strategies was creating a safer environment for all. In this evolving narrative, the city's investments in safety, mental health, and culture were no longer isolated projects, but a cohesive movement. Each new shelter for the young, each community mural, each counseling center, each transparent portal, and each fact-checked rumor formed a lattice that fortified the city against future tragedies. The city's residents, once victims of a cycle of violence, now had the tools and the community to break that cycle, a testament to the transformative power of sustained collective action.